want to get into the first part of my stream. And that is my review, chat, my non-spoiler review for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And again, for people that are unaware of the film's synopsis, the plot, if you will, chat, follows, world-famous archaeologist Indiana Jones as he's racing against time and an old foe to retrieve a legendary artifact that can supposedly change the course of history itself. Before jumping into just my overall thoughts on this film, I did want to briefly just bring up just my thoughts and my appreciation for, the original Indiana Jones trilogy, chat, Raiders and Temple of Doom, Last Crusade. Also, my thoughts on Crystal Skull after having rewatched it after 15 years of not seeing it yet since originally in the theaters. And also just kind of the lead up to this movie, the behind the scenes, everything that was working in the background or working against this film in particular, chat. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, I grew up with the Indiana Jones trilogy. I remember seeing these films when I was a little kid, very impressionable age. I owned the original trilogy on VHS, and I love the movies, chat. I think like the Star Wars trilogy, Indiana Jones trilogy, I feel like for like a lot of people that inspired them, inspired them to be filmmakers or writers or creators, like, these grand adventures. It really just shows you the magic, the love behind filmmaking, how many ideas you can put behind it and everything that you can tell, within a grand, story. That's what I think of when I think of Indiana Jones, some of the best of film, the best of cinema. And certainly that goes without saying, with Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is, one of my favorite movies of all time, top 10, probably top 5, chat. That movie to me is one of my favorites. It does so many things right. It harkens back to those 30s and 40s serials that clearly inspired, action adventure serials that is, that clearly inspired, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And they brought that, at the time, back, in the 1980s to great effect. Now, Temple of Doom. I have a lot of love for Temple of Doom. It has its flaws, Chad. It's much darker, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But it has I think a ridiculous co-lead in Kate Capshaw and the racism, Chad. Didn't work then, and it certainly doesn't work now. But there's a lot about the movie that I like. I like that it's primarily set in India. Love the relationship between Harrison Ford and Ke Huy Quan, Indiana Jones and Short Round, who played India and Short Round respectively. That is truly Indiana Jones' son, and I think that's like the heart of the movie for me. There's a lot I like about that. I actually like all the voodoo stuff too. I think it's pretty cool. And Last Crusade, which I feel like is, nearly as good as Raiders. Some people actually put it above Raiders. I know a number of people that's like not only their favorite Indiana Jones movies, but like one of their favorite movies of all time. It probably is for me too. It's a great film. It felt like an improvement over Temple of Doom. It wasn't as dark, but it still had an epic story. And I think one of the best things about that movie, Chad, was the casting of Sean Connery. Who should play the dad of Indiana Jones? James Bond. That's amazing right there. And it's kind of funny because initially Steven Spielberg wanted to make a James Bond movie until Lucas said, I got this other idea, and went ahead and made Indiana Jones instead, or at least Raiders instead. But yeah, I love that film. And then, we get, moving outside the trilogy, we get to Crystal Skull, which, at the time, like, leading up to that movie, I was so excited for it, like everyone was. I was loving the marketing. It was the return of the grand action adventure I think we've been yearning for, which I feel like that subgenre is in a really weird place right now. And I was thoroughly disappointed by the movie. It had a handful of good moments, but overall, just a frustrating experience. It just felt like that movie just didn't have the aesthetics of the original trilogy. The overuse of CGI and green screen, I think, took away from that movie. It felt inauthentic. And again, it has like a couple of good moments and a couple of good performances, but overall, I think it's an extraordinarily disappointing film, and one that I have no desire ever to watch again, especially having just reviewed it and done an odd video commentary for the movie, so we can put that one to bed. But then leading up to this movie, I think we all knew that eventually there was going to be another Indiana Jones, obviously with Disney acquiring Lucasfilm. It feels crazy that it took them this long to actually make this movie. And maybe that's, the reasons why it is the way it is, since all the behind the scenes issues currently going on at Lucasfilm and Disney right now. It's kind of weird that it took so long to make this sequel. But, you know, I have to admit, like, my anticipation, I was always wary of this movie, you know, going into it long before, even after they premiered it at Cannes, and it got, I mean, be kind, you know, mixed to negative reviews. And I feel like that's almost been following the film ever since, like a stigma that's been on the film, you know, what was it? Nearly 2 months ago, Chad, like 6 weeks ago at this point. And so going into this and then hearing just all the mixed reception, all the reviews, I was like, all right, I was preparing myself for the Crystal Skull over again. I was preparing myself for a disappointment. And, you know, the one thing I do want to start off with this review, getting into the positive aspects of the movie. I have to say, the one thing that immediately stands out to me about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is that Harrison Ford really brings everything he can to his last performance as Indy. You know, where I felt like he was sometimes sleepwalking in Crystal Skull, the way in which he was directed. It just didn't capture that original, you know, magic of the trilogy. I just really noticed an earnestness to his performance, and also with like a mixture, a large amount of melancholy to it as well. And I really like that aspect of the movie, which I think maybe for some people will not. This is not Indiana Jones who, you know, is the swashbuckling archaeologist adventure who always kind of has a bit of a lopsided grin on his face, and it's like, yeah, he'll complain, he's sarcastic, and he has a little bit of that here. But this is like he's kind of a sad man, and that might turn people off. But I thought it was like an interesting addition to this character, because it also makes sense for where he is in his life. The film actually starts with a de-aged Indiana Jones in 1945, towards the end of World War II. You know, Indy, along with Toby Jones, who I actually quite liked in the movie, plays this character, Basil Shaw. And, you know, they get up to typical, you know, Indy shenanigans that we often saw in the original trilogy for about, like, the first 20 or so minutes. You know, battling Nazis, dealing with objects of the occult, you know, etc. There are a lot of moments in this initial part of the film that felt pretty clever and fun, and sometimes fairly brutal. I think that was one of the things about, like, Crystal Skull, maybe with the exception of maybe the ending when, you know, what's her name, Kate Blanchett is Mariana Sputnik, her head explodes, goes, ah, you know. I felt like the movie was missing a lot of brutality. There's a lot more brutality in this movie, and I like that. You feel some of these punches, you feel some of these people getting shot, and you feel that in the beginning here, for the most part, you know. And again, I don't want to get too negative right off the bat. You know, the de-aging for Harrison Ford's face does not always work. And again, I want to get into more of that, you know, with the film's aesthetic, you know, in a bit. Also, he kind of sounds a lot older as well. It's like, yes, this is young Indiana Jones that we're seeing, de-age Indiana Jones, but he still sounds like, you know, 80, 79-year-old, 81-year-old, however old he is now, you know, Harrison Ford. And I was like, it's a little weird. But there are some great action adventure moments to be had in that part of the film. I mean, it very much is trying to harken back to the days of the original trilogy. And I was like, I like that, and I respected that. And there's a lot of stuff within that 20 minutes that does work. You know, it's later on in the film that we get a sense of who Indiana Jones is now. Almost felt like, hey, you know that all those films that you used to like, the original trilogy, here's that kind of for like 20 minutes, or at least a modern version of that, right? But now the majority of the film, which is pretty much the next 2 hours and 10 minutes after that initial 20-minute intro, you know, we're living in a time that seemingly doesn't appreciate, you know, history as it once did, which is like takes place during 1969. I mean, the film literally opens up with like the moon landing, or, you know, and they, like we see like all those, you know, astronauts chat, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, etc. But the film definitely opens up with like this idea that, yeah, people don't seem to appreciate history as it once did, doesn't have the same magic or intrigue as it once did, you know, because now we're thinking about space and the final frontier. And it also has little appreciation for Indiana Jones himself. Indy, he's not in a good place in his life. And there is a sadness to Harrison Ford's performance that, to me, I didn't think that didn't feel inauthentic. That felt very authentic, and I actually like that aspect to it. And I don't want to get into too many spoilers about the movie, but I just want to emphasize, like, how good I think Harrison Ford is in this movie, despite, I think, some issues that are definitely present in the film. There's this one moment that really struck a chord with me, and it's funny because he's actually referencing like a character in a situation from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which you would think like, oh, well, you probably hate the fact that he brings up a certain character in a certain context. It's like, actually, no, it worked. And I don't want to get into too much because it's going to be a big reveal, but they do explain the absence of Shia LaBeouf's character, Mutt Williams, in the movie. And especially in like this one scene in which Indy is talking about his absence and how something that happened to that character caused pretty much, all of his like recent misery and the dissolving of his relationship again with Marion Ravenwood. And something about just Harrison Ford, the way in which he delivered those lines, and I was like, wow, I was like, this is interesting. I like seeing Indiana Jones this way, presented in that, where he's not like, there's a situation, we'll get into it, where he's just like, I'm old, my knees, my back, my broken vertebrae, it keeps breaking. It's just like, I get it that you're old, okay? It's like, that's almost like unnecessary to me. It's just like, all right, you're laying it on really fucking thick. We all know he's old, but here, the way in which they showcased his age is not through his physical ailments. It's not through him complaining or having a character say, hey, you're really fucking old. No, it's listening to him talking about a really tragic situation to his family and how that history has, it's really bad history that has affected his life, his marriage, his relationship, him as a father. And I thought, like, this is good. That to me was that to me was probably like my favorite part of the movie, because it felt like, wow, this is actually well-written dialogue, and he's having a conversation. He doesn't feel like a CGI action figure that's being thrown from scene to scene and scene. It's like, now here is Indiana Jones. That's authentic Indiana Jones, but it's portraying him, in such a way that feels real, and feels grounded and makes you wistful and sad. And I like that moment a lot. Also, a lot of the films, again, to be positive, a lot of the film's production design, particularly inside many buildings, especially like when we're in Tangier or like we're in Greece where a lot of this movie takes place, I think we're quite good. We not only see kind of like what the late 60s look like in America, but, what it looks like in several countries around the world. I feel like for a lot of people, when they think of like the 1960s, it's Americans. Any country really, but, whatever your country is that you live in, when you think of like, oh, what it was like back then, you think of what it was like in the time period earlier in America. But it was kind of cool to see, okay, what did the 1960s look like in Tangier? What did the 1960s look like in Greece or in Northern Africa? It's like, oh, this is kind of cool. I like that. And I like the insides of a lot of these buildings, all the costumes I thought were very good. They really stood out. Great attention to detail, chat. They nailed that aesthetic. That aesthetic felt like the older movies when we were inside certain places. The problem is, everything else about the movie, I would say, is a really mixed bag. Some things work better than others. Some things are annoying and don't work at all. And it has these moments that pop up that, it's like, wow, this feels like just a really well-made action-adventure film. And sometimes where it's just like, this feels like they're just going through the motions with all of this. And it doesn't help that the pacing it just feels so off. Much like in Crystal Skull, like it feels off here again. Which is so weird to me. Getting into like the other characters, I will say, like I said, Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones. I do think he's great throughout the entire movie. I think maybe sometimes he's given dialogue just like, I get it, you're old, you don't have to fucking say it every other, scene. But the rest of the cast, I'm really mixed on. Like the one person everyone's talking about right now is Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Helena Shaw, who is the daughter of Toby Jones's character, Basil Shaw, in the beginning of the film, who fights all the Nazis at the end of World War II in 1945 with Indy. I actually, when it first starts out, I actually liked her, which is funny because I was reading a lot of reviews are saying like, oh, she's unbearable and she's mean. And I'm just like, in the beginning of this movie, I'm not really seeing that. She seems really nice and earnest. And I like that she seems to be excited about archaeology. She seems very respectful of Indiana Jones and stuff. The only problem is that soon after that all happens, and this is not a spoiler, but you realize like, oh, it's all fucking con. That she's actually this con woman who, feels very self-assured and feels very self-important and, comes across, and I don't even know that the film's aware of, like, to me, came across, like, really arrogant and mean through a lot of points in the movie. And I just, there was just so many moments where I feel like there was just, like, a lack of chemistry between Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Harrison Ford, which is so bizarre because I think initially I was like, oh, I'm actually liking this relationship. Because before I was just like, okay, this goddaughter, this new character that we even know. I originally thought that she was like the daughter of Marcus Brody. It's like, oh, okay, that's a connection, but it's not. Toby Jones is a completely new character. But I was like, I don't know what people are saying. But then it's later on in the movie when there's just like a huge, it's actually quickly in the movie. There's just like, she's Two-Face. She becomes someone completely different. And I don't know, I kind of found that off-putting, to be honest. Sometimes I thought she was good, and sometimes I thought she was, holding her own. But there's other times where she just kind of came across like really inauthentic to me. And again, there was just this meanness that she has towards Indiana Jones, which just feels so out of place. And I was just like, why are you doing this, like, to him? Like, even when they bring up like possibly the reason, I'm just like, I don't really buy that at all. But yeah, I just did not like that. And how they wrap up her story, they don't really wrap it up. Usually for like these characters, like there's a lesson learned. It's like, I don't think she learned any lessons here. It's also just weird because, she'll critique Indiana Jones like, you're a grave robber. And it was like, you're a con artist who steals, all these ancient objects, and on the black market. It's just kind of odd that like they didn't want to kind of point at her and say like, no, she's just as, she's an incredibly flawed character. That to me was a little weird. And it's too bad because I actually initially liked her in the movie, but then later on she was just so sporadic. I was kind of getting whiplash from her because sometimes she'd like seemingly care about Indy, but then she'd be like, I'm a scumbag, and I was like, where are we going with this? I just didn't feel like she was very consistent. Also, it's very another thing is she does get like a lot of scenes in the movie that were kind of meant for Indiana Jones, like just a lot of like the action beats, but because Harrison Ford's so old, he just doesn't get to do those things, and so they gave him a lot to her, which I think might stick in some people's craw. It's like, it's an Indiana Jones movie. It just, to me, it definitely. It does feel like hey, we're going to set up this character for a spinoff, because I know there were talks, apparently. There were conversations or some type of development. I think it's all gone now, of doing a Helena Shaw spinoff Indiana Jones series. But I think that's done. That's on top of the Kathleen Kennedy Lucasfilm pile chat of all those other dead Star Wars projects. So I think that's been kind of killed. But yeah, there's just a lot of scenes where they kind of set her up to like, hey, she's the hero in this sequence, not Indy. I'm just like, I don't know if you want to do that for the last. It's literally the last Indiana Jones movie. It's like kind of the focus should be on him, in my opinion. But it's too bad because I initially liked her, but I think later on they just did this twist with her, and it's early. But it's like, I wish she kind of didn't do that. I like their dynamic, and then you just kind of made it, so caustic. Mads Mikkelsen, which, I was initially, I was like, perfect. Mads Mikkelsen being cast as a villain. It happens to him a lot, but hey, man, he has those face, he has that voice, and he's playing a Nazi. I was like, oh, cool. Plays the character of Jürgen Voller, chat, who is this, I actually like this because I'm thinking like, how are we getting the Nazis back into this? We're in the 60s. So it's so cool because they actually bring up like Operation Paperclip in this film, chat. So for those that know, Operation Paperclip was this mission where United States and Britain and a number of other countries, but most of the U.S., where they recruited all of these former Third Reich German Nazi scientists into all their various programs, scientific and military. And it's true, chat. Nazis literally put us on the moon. I mean, that's a fact. And they bring that up. Like, they say, like, hey, this guy is responsible for putting man on the moon, right? But his whole thing is the reason why what he wants to get done is, he's obsessed with, I guess, the big MacGuffin in the movie, which is the dial of Archimedes. Shit, they call it something else, the or whatever. But it's the dial of Archimedes, right? Which, he believes can go to certain fixed points in time, and then you can literally change history. He's obsessive. He's been obsessive with it, for 20 years, over 20 years since, the fall of the Third Reich in 1945. And he wants to basically correct, not like, like kill certain people. He wants to correct Hitler's mistakes, which they say in the trailer. And I was like, that's interesting. It's like, hey, this is a cool way to bring back the Nazis, and also kind of has like a bit of a Winter Soldier vibe to it to an extent, where it's like, ooh, shit, like Hydra's been been entrenched in S.H.I.E.L.D. for years. Kind of similar here, where there's like a lot of fucking Nazis in the American government, and they're all still loyal to him. And I thought that was really neat. The problem is, like, his performance, I don't feel like, despite what he wants to do, and despite, like, his like, the kind of, like, the cool function he plays in the movies, is like, oh, shit, he's been with the United States for years, and he has all these resources at his disposal, right? And he's able to cut corners. Like, he doesn't really get to do too much, which is kind of sad and frustrating. I just never found him to be that menacing, which is kind of weird. Like, there's almost like a quiet softness to his character, which I felt like that was an interesting choice to go with. But, he's thoughtful. That's how I would describe him, because even in the beginning of the movie, we see him like against other Nazis, and they're not taking him seriously because he's soft-spoken, he's more thoughtful, Chad. He doesn't, typically like to use brutal measures, which is weird that he's like, why are you even a goddamn Nazi? You seem not to be, like, kind of jiving with them. He's like, but I really hate black people. It's like, well, okay, fair enough. All I'll say is there's a scene in this movie where he sees a black person. He's like, my God. Oh, my God. They allow you to walk in the buildings here? What the hell's that about? So I was like, there it is. Because most of the time I'm like, oh, maybe he'll be like a defector or something. Maybe there's something else at play here. And it's like, oh, maybe I honestly thought there was going to be like a twist in the movie. And it's like, oh, it's not what you actually think. But that quickly went away when he saw a black man and went, oh, it's black man. It's like, yes, it's a black man, Mads Mikkelsen. I was like, okay, fair enough. Which is weird to say, but almost fell out of character for how he's presenting himself, But that's his plan. And I don't know, he just seemed, I guess I just felt like he was told to just underplay it. And I feel like I wanted more from that. I wanted a little more. When I think of a Nazi chat, we think of bombacity. I mean, these guys were yelling half the goddamn time. They have delusions of grandeur. And like this guy, he's not that, which is interesting. But he just really hates black people, That's his own. It's kind of weird. So yeah, I expected more from him. Also, there's pretty much a short round replacement in this movie. I mean, no offense to the actor, Ethan Isidore replaces character Teddy, who's pretty much Helena Shaw's, short round. There was just, I don't know. I mean, I hate to say it, but he just feels like a lesser version of that character, and one that doesn't. There's also he has a bit of I hate to be mean, but his dialogue his delivery just felt kind of stunted and wooden a lot of the times, and it just didn't work with me. Whereas there's something about Ke Huy Quan's performance, like he had just this jovial, earnestness to him all the time. It's like, Dr. Jones, Indy, I love you. It's like something about like, I believe you. I believed him that he did love him. And just look at this kid, he just like, yeah, I'm just not feeling the same thing. They have him doing that. He gets his little stunt moments. He gets his little action moments where he's precocious and things. But, overall, it just feels like kind of like a lesser sidekick, lesser short round, sadly, Chad. And I'll talk about Ke Huy Quan because, man, I wanted him in this movie. But we'll get to that soon. There's also a bunch of other supporting characters. I actually really like Toby Jones in the film as Basil Shaw, who plays the initial sidekick. A guy who is not a man of action. He's very much a scientist, very much a archaeologist chat, but his rapport with D.H. Harrison Ford was, I thought, quite good, and he gets in some cool little situations. I liked him. I thought he was great. I wish he was in the movie more. He gets another scene. There's technically, I guess, two flashbacks in the movie. One, which is the initial 20 minutes of the film, and another shorter one, which feels like it takes place maybe in the late 40s, I guess maybe in the 50s or something. And I don't know, I was like, I want to see more about this guy. But yeah, he's just not in it too much outside the first 20 minutes and then one scene he gets. But I was like, oh, cool. I feel like he could have been like one of those iconic, Indiana Jones sidekick, like a Sala. There's a warmth to his character. There's a warmth. And also sadness. Antonio Banderas is in this movie, which I was like, oh yeah, he's in this film. And he's fun. It's just like he's only shows up for like a few minutes, and I would have liked to have spent more time with him because there feels like there's a lot of history between him and Indy. I mean, they even talk about that. But yeah, he's just he's like, here he is. Oh, now he's gone. And I was like, I would have liked to see more with him, especially when you get Antonio Banderas. I was like, all right, let's go. But I mean, what he gets is fun. I just wanted more from it. I wanted more from it. What I thought was really underrated in the film, which no one's talking about her, but Shawnette Wilson, who plays this CIA agent, and she's initially in the film hunting for the Dial of Destiny, for Archimedes' Dial, and Indiana Jones, and she's kind of like doesn't understand like what's going on, with Voller, who now goes by the name Schmidt, now that he's part of the American space program. But I liked her role initially, where she's kind of like a bit of an anti-hero, anti-villain, if you will. But she doesn't know everything that's going on. But I don't know. I liked her. I thought she did a good job. She held her own. She gets some cool little action scenes there. But again, I almost felt like, I mean, really, they didn't know what to do with the character afterwards, because then she's kind of gone from the movie after a certain point. It was like, hey, let's go on more of this. This would be kind of cool rapport. Her and Indiana Jones, someone she initially mistrusts, and was like, oh, this guy's actually in the right. But then, we don't get to see that, which is kind of frustrating. Boyd Holbrook, who I love Boyd Holbrook, as I live and breathe, the Wolverine. He's just, he's a good old Southern boy that wants the Third Reich to rise again. Germany will rise again. That's his whole thing. He has like a big version of him. There's like a crippled version of Boyd Holbrook, literally a guy on crutches who I was like, what is with this guy? Very weird. And then there's like a big giant version of Boyd Holbrook in the movie. And to be honest, they don't really do much with him. Like Boyd Holbrook, who I really like as an actor. He's made some great stuff. He's been in some not so great stuff, chat. Initially it's like, oh, Boyd Holbrook's going to be in a Predator movie? Oh, sign me up. And, again, not his fault. And here I don't think it's his fault. It's just like, this guy has so much charisma. It's like, can you imagine what you can do with, like, again, this guy is, they even say he's from he's Alabama, chat. He is a Southerner, and he is a racist motherfucker. And he wants Nazis to come about again. That's his. I was like, you can play so much with that, right? You can really like, be over exaggerated and be like, oh yeah, here's your wretched henchman character. You just want Indy just to punch in the face, right? But I don't know. He's just kind of like, yeah, I like the Nazis. I don't like black people, kinda. Or maybe that once he's all right. But other than that, they don't really do much with him, which is kind of sad. And then they do bring some familiar faces into the film. Again, John Rhys-Davies does appear as Sala, but again, in a very small role. He kind of serves, he's the deliverer, which is sad, chat. But to be fair, he does the same thing in Raiders, although I think there's just more interactions between him and Harrison Ford, where you're like, oh, I understand this friendship. But he mostly just delivers exposition. So, Indy can get from point A to point B. But we do learn that, like, why, because, we learn why Sala's living in New York now with, members of his family. It's like, oh, that's interesting. There's just, like, kind of one aspect that I have to admit bothers me. And so this is, like, kind of a spoiler, but not too much. Because, like, in Raiders, I always thought, like, Sala was pretty wealthy. I'm like, he has that huge house. He has that huge family. He has all these connections and resources. And I was like, it's like this guy's like a major member of the community. I mean, he lives in fucking Egypt. He's a wealthy guy. And here I have to say, they make him a taxi driver. I'm just like, why'd you do that? He went from being like a very wealthy Egyptian man that would always help out Indiana Jones because he loved him. That's his friend. That's his brother. And you made him a taxi driver. I'm just like, I don't really like that. I don't like that. It's like, oh, well, you know, he's the brown guy from the Middle East. Let him drive a taxi cab. It's like, it's kind of racist, in my opinion. You know, he's pretty much there for fan service. But again, it's like, why you bring him in this movie? You're not going to use him a lot. It's like, yeah, let's do that Grand Adventure. I mean, John Rhys Davies is a great actor. He's a fine actor. He was great in Raiders and in Last Crusade. So let's like use him instead of just being like a fountain of exposition and then like having come in at the end again. It's like, no, let's use this character instead of making him a fucking taxi driver. The one I will say though, Helen Mirren's in this movie. She comes in at the end. And she has a great moment with Harrison Ford. Like, you know, they still have that chemistry, chat, 40 plus years. You know what, now 43 years at this point? No, 42 years? 42 years strong, chat. They still have that chemistry with each other. And they do a certain scene which almost initially comes off as fan service, but because of how it's done and in what order it's done, I actually thought was really, really good. I really liked Karen Allen in the movie. I thought she did a good job for, again, the small scene that she was in. You know, I really liked her as Marion Ravenwood. And I was like, God damn, this is really good. Why couldn't they had like that a scene like that in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? You know, again, she wasn't bad in that movie. She was fine in that film. But here, like the moment that they gave her, I thought was really good. So, you know, I think in terms of legacy characters, Karen Allen as Marion Ravenwood was treated much better than John Rhys Davies as Sala. She's not a taxi driver, thankfully, Chad. Not a taxi driver. Another thing and you guys heard me talking about this before in the past, Chad. Like, I am really sensitive to aesthetics to certain films and franchises, you know? Especially ones that are just like, it's so obvious what the aesthetic was for this film or the series of films. Like the director knew, like, this is what it is. And this is what defines this movie, right? And you know, that was my big issue with Crystal Skull, was this overuse of CGI and green screen. It didn't even attempt to emulate the original aesthetics of the trilogy. And sadly, Chad, that's the same case here. I think the majority of the film's aesthetic is it really bothered me. You know, there's a lot of CGI and a frequent use of green screen. And I'm just like, why do they keep doing this? I don't get it. You know, it's like like if Steven Spielberg, I can understand that. I mean, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Ridley Scott, like all these filmmakers, they just don't. I just don't think they have the eye anymore, you know, for that type of filmmaking, that blockbuster filmmaking. And they've literally forgot the aesthetics that they created all the way back in the day. I do think that plays a role into it. Also, I do think it's just like, listen, you know, doing those kind of stunts, doing those practical effects, using those matte paintings, those blue screens, that was hard, all right? And now, see, with the advent of CGI, it's become a lot easier. It's not as costly. You're saving time. And it's like, all those things are true. There's no doubt about that. But when you create a fucking aesthetic for a franchise, and you're gonna need to adhere to it, you know. Like, it's like, why are we? I'm not saying it's like I hate all CGI and green. It's like, no, I mean, when it's used in other movies, like, it's used well. But like, Indiana Jones looks a certain way, Alien looks a certain way, right? Star Wars looks a certain way, and when you suddenly just do something completely different, like literally change these things, like, this doesn't look the same. And sadly, Chad, like, even in the initial 20 minutes, it's like, why are we using so much CGI? Like, I know it's a CGI train. I know that's not a real background. It's like, sometimes it's even hard to me tell, like, what is even real in this shot, in this scene? And I was hoping that James Mangold would adhere back to the original aesthetic that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas initially created with Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom and Last. He doesn't. And it looks very similar to Crystal Skull in terms of a lot of those scenes and a lot of the action sequence, chat. And I'm just like, I just don't get it, you know? And I think another part of it, I think one of the big reasons why it keeps these movies keep looking this way. It's like, why does fucking Prometheus look clean and shiny? Why does fucking Dial of Destiny look clean and shiny and you know, there's no grit? And it's I think these films are just like victims of being overproduced. You know, we've talked about this recently. And you have like, this movie's like one of the most expensive films ever made. It's $300 million. I mean, they say it's $295. It's $300 million. Shit, it's one of the most expensive movies ever made. And I think that is a detriment to the filmmaking because you're throwing so much at it, then it's not as clever. It feels like, we'll just do this. We'll just do the green screen, or we don't need to shoot on location. We'll just add this CGI sequence here. We don't need to have any of this cool stunt work or a choreographed action scene. It'll just be CGI rubber people. And I'm just like, no, that doesn't look right. It doesn't look good. And even there's a lot of that in this movie. I'm just like, God damn it, why? And I think it's a combination of these filmmakers forgetting these aesthetics and a director being beholden to a very big overproduced budget where he has to use these things. He has to use this technology. The audience won't like practical effects. The audience won't like that old school choreography and stunt work. It needs to have CGI men on a green screen doing CGI jumping jacks and flips. Do that. That's what this does. The film's ending, the third act, again, not going into too much detail, it will be very divisive. It's going to be one of the most divisive moments of the movie. It does something even over the top for Indiana Jones, which I know, it's like, what are you talking about? We have the Ark of the Covenant make people's faces explode and melt. You got a guy ripping someone's heart out. You got a 800-year-old knight that's been guarding a cup. What do you mean? It's like, no, they top all that. Even Saucerman? Yeah. It's pretty crazy. And, you know, at that point in the film where we're towards the end, I'm just like, hey, all right, sure, let's go. It's just, it's a little much. It's a little much. And also just showing you like what the power of this device is. I don't know. Like, there could have been a way. I think, again, it's how overproduced it honestly feels, Chad, because it is a very big, bombastic, over-the-top CGI green screen Aladdin effect at the end of the movie, where it's just like, maybe you could have done this, but if you did it with and you can, and I think back in the day they could have done something like this, but it just with a little more depth of hand, with a little more subtlety, where it just doesn't feel so big. You know, I think going so big was a mistake. That happens to a lot of franchises and blockbusters. Like, we got to make it bigger than the last one. You know, where it's just like, no, I mean, compared to like how Last Crusade ends, where it's like, you know, just a son saving his father. I mean, that is. I mean, you know, it's a little quieter than a scene where people's fucking faces are melting off and guys' heads are exploding. You know, it's a little quieter ending, but it still is impactful, and you still have like a 800-year-old knight walking out going, I told you. But here it's just like it's a little too much, and I felt like if they just did this a little differently, then it would have been a lot better. The ending is they do a thing which I just hate. That makes the ending feel a bit anticlimactic, where we transitioned from the holy shit, this CGI just cacophony to like, oh, we're here now. It's like, what? And I think that's gonna be divisive for people, but I like the final moment. That's where the big final moment between Indy and Marion is, when she comes in the movie chat. Now she's there. She's at the end of the film. That is great to me. And I was like, this is pretty good. So I didn't like how we ended up here, but I like that. I like that moment there at the end. I thought that was good, but I still feel like it's going to be very divisive, and there's going to be a lot of people that will not like it. And I understand completely why. You know, I was like, I was at a point where I was like, all right, sure, we're already here, so I can't do anything about it. Would not have done them this way. I feel like it's just too overproduced. And that's sad. That's kind of sad, chat. And listen, this movie, it doesn't, listen, you're going in like, well, is it at least as good as any of the original trilogy? No, I don't think so. Some people are saying like, oh, this is better than Temple Doom. I don't think it's better than Temple Doom. It doesn't reach the same heights of the original trilogy in many aspects, with the exception, again, of Harrison Ford's performance as Indiana Jones. I think he's actually really good in the movie. Even when the parts where, again, there's this melancholiness to his performance that I actually thought was really cool. And I was like, oh, let's go into more of that. But we don't always do that. Because sometimes we got to go from here to here to here to here to here. We travel very quickly around a lot. But there's also these points in the movie where it feels like, man, the pacing's kind of off here. And it's not really working. But, I don't know. Listen, I'm literally coming off of this film after seeing it a couple hours ago, so I might change my mind. It's like, do I like this better than Crystal Skull? Yeah, I think so. But it's not a movie I have any desire to ever watch again. It's never going to be like I watch the Indiana Jones movies, it feels like at least once a year. I mean, Raiders, I could put that on any time. And really any of the Indiana Jones movies, I put them on any of those at any time and be entertained. Crystal Skull, I will never watch that one again. But this one's just like, yeah, it was entertaining. It was fun at times. It has good moments, but there's just a lot that doesn't work about it that I just find frustrating. That I feel like, certain, it's just like Disney, Lucasfilm, and it doesn't matter. It's Steven Spielberg, James Bell. I don't think they get it anymore. And it's just kind of weird and frustrating. So I don't know. It's fine. It's okay. It is what it is, Chad. The fact that this is the grand finale of Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones is kind of sad, but I suppose it could have been worse. Could have been worse, Chad. Could have been worse. But yeah, it doesn't affect my love for the original trilogy, or it's never going to affect my love for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those are still great movies, fun movies. Raiders is a masterpiece in my mind, so it's never going to take away from that, no matter how many bad Indiana Jones movies they make. So yeah, for me, it's okay. It's okay. It has a lot of flaws, but Harrison Ford, I think, at the end of the day, Chad, Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones is the absolute best thing about this movie. So if you want to go into the film with that in mind, going to see like, hey, Harrison Ford really brings it, you might walk away pleasantly, please. But if there's other things that bother you, again, if you are very sensitive to the aesthetics of this franchise as I am, you might have a lot of issues. But yeah, that's how I feel about the film, chat. I don't even know what rating I'd give it, honestly. I'm kind of like in between like a low matinee, a high rental. That's where I'm sitting at right now, chat. So we'll see. One thing I will say, then I'll ask you guys, for those of you who have seen the film, I really believe that, it was just the whole timing of it. I think it would have been a lot better if they brought back Ke Huy Quan as Short Round, because it feels like the Helena Shaw character is a replacement. She's very much, I feel like, a replacement for Shia LaBeouf's Mutt Williams character, where he's trying to reconnect with her, and that's not really going well through a lot of the movie, but they come to some, I guess, I don't know if you could kind of come to some parlay, if you will, or kind of like some point of understanding, maybe not. But I really do wish they brought back Ke Huy Quan as Short Round. We could have had that true father-son story that I thought, like, what would have been. There's a thing in this movie where Indiana Jones feels like he failed his biological son. And I think what would have been the heart of this film, had they done, and this is just me, like what I would want. I'm not judging the film based on this, but I'm just like, this is what I want. And it's like, he feels like he failed his biological son. What I would have liked to have seen then is that he reunites with Short Round, and I mean, you can play that relationship up. Maybe he has that guilt where he forgot about this kid. He almost abandoned this kid. He didn't feel like he was there for him. Maybe Short Round feels that way. Maybe Short Round is like, he doesn't feel that way. He's like, he loves Indy, but Indy has that in him, and he can't help it. It's like that. You can't get over that anxiety, that feeling, right? And he doesn't want to disappoint him. He doesn't want to fail him like he did his biological son. And I feel like if that was in the movie, if that was the focus, then I think it would have had a lot of heart. It would have even more heart. Because this movie occasionally does. It was mostly coming from Harrison Ford. But if you brought back him and you would have had that, that would have been amazing. I mean, you still would have probably had some of the issues with it feeling overproduced in the CGI. But it's like, that's a story that needs to be told. And I wish they did that. But yeah, chat. What about you guys? How do you guys feel about, and again, no spoilers, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? Archimedes' Dial. They don't call it the Dial of Destiny, by the way. They call it the Arkakamama. Or Archimedes' Dial, because they can't say the other way. I think at one point the word you said. Oh yeah, John Williams. I mean, yeah. Oh no. I mean, I should have said this. I think I was remiss not to say this. Sometimes I feel like it's not even necessary. The music is fantastic in this movie. It's John Williams, and he kills it. He does such a great job, Chad. All the music. I mean, obviously Indy's theme, but also all the new pieces, the villainous pieces, I think work quite well. It's like it's very well scored movie. They do incorporate 60s music into the film, which how they do so was like, okay, that's a little bit better than how they did in the trailer. It just felt really awkward and weird. It's like they have a certain scene where we hear modern music, and Harrison Ford's reaction is my reaction, like, shut that shit off. I don't want to hear it. And I like that. But yeah, the score is very impressive. Very, very impressive. Isaac, thank you for the 300 biddies. I'm gonna read your statement in just a second, good sir. See what everyone's saying. Time for the reboot. See, I will get into this too, because I don't think you can even need to reboot this, really. Yeah, you have those two lesser sequels, I feel. But you still have the original trilogy. But you can. I'm still on the hey, just recast, tell more stories. You can do this. But the only negative side of that, like I think I might be in the minority. Like, I don't care about if they recast. Honestly, that's fine with me. It's like, sure, you can tell more stories, but it's how they're going to tell the stories, which I'm nervous about, because I feel like Disney, Lucasfilm, whoever. They're going to be like, it has to look like how these movies look like. It has to look like Crystal Skull and Dallas. Is like, no, that's the thing I'm really, really concerned about. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I want to take the time to tell you about my Patreon, Class in the Glass, which offers hundreds of film commentaries and video reactions to numerous movies, TV shows, and cartoons. If you're a fan of shows like Batman the Animated Series and Avatar: The Last Airbender, or films like Aliens and Raiders of the Lost Ark, my Patreon is the platform for you. Currently, I'm doing a subathon to reach 75 subs on the platform. If we hit 75 subs, we'll be able to start voting on the next edited YouTube reaction, which will include actual clips and scenes from the movies and shows I comment over. Choose from such films as Fire and Ice, Masters of the Universe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, or Spawn. Subscribing at any tier level is appreciated, and feel free to give feedback at any time. Thank you again for watching the video, and see you next time.